So years ago, I had the great privilege of working in the foster system in Atlanta, Georgia. And at the time, my colleagues and I were there offering a compassion training program to young men and women to help them learn to develop and sustain more strong, close relationships. And in one session, we took up the topic of fear as a way of getting into our underlying obstacles to connecting with others. And in the session we sat in a close-knit circle on the floor, and we went around one by one and named a fear that we held. And if anyone else in that circle held that fear with us, they were to stand up and take a breath with us. And so it began. So one girl stood up and said, "I'm actually afraid of getting close to people because I'm afraid that actually I'll hurt them." A few others stood up, took a breath with her, and they sat down. Another young woman stood up and said, "I'm actually afraid of getting close to others because I'm afraid actually in some way I'll let them down. I'll be a disappointment in some way." A few others stood up with her, took a breath, and they all sat down. And then one young, brave girl stood up and said, "I'm actually afraid that deep down I'm just simply not lovable. Like something deep down is actually wrong with me." And there was a kind of heaviness that filled the room. And after a moment, every single person in that group stood up and took a breath with her. And that session stayed with me for a really long time, not just because of the bravery and the vulnerability that those young women exhibited in that course, but also because that feeling of somehow deep down something's not quite right with me, that I'm not perfect, that maybe somehow for some reason I'm just not worthy, is something that I see in so many people I work with in my professional life, and also something I encounter with so many others in my personal life. And that experience of working in the foster system kind of set me on a new trajectory. I'd been working in compassion programs, helping people for so many years learn to extend compassion and care to others, and kind of did a half-assed job helping them extend care to themselves. But it felt like something was missing. Like, how could we help people connect with other people if on some level they did not feel worthy of connection? And so my colleague, John McCransky, and I and our team at Courage of Care set out to start to address some of these issues. And we started the Courage of Care Coalition in part to help many people in social service, but really all those in caring professions, parents, doctors, nurses, social workers, anyone who really encounters another human being, really find ways to activate and deepen their capacity for care and compassion. Many people in social service struggle with burnout. We know that 40 to 50% of teachers leave the profession within the first few years of teaching. Nurses, doctors, other medical professionals suffer from physical and emotional exhaustion. There's low morale that's pervasive in many areas of social service. Even our clergy and our spiritual leaders suffer from medical issues and depression. In fact, they actually suffer from the highest rates of burnout in those in all areas of social service. So there's a problem. Part of it obviously is systemic. Many people in social service are overworked and under-resourced. Many of us at the front lines confront or witness the effects of trauma, poverty, structural inequity, structural racism on a daily basis. And yet part of the problem is also cultural and has to do with the way we understand what compassion is and how we cultivate it. I think many of us in social service are kind of forced to believe that our job is simply to care for others. And there's little really attention to caring for ourselves, and very little attention and even fear in learning to be cared for. And that's really holding us back. It's actually our ability to be seen, to be cared for, that actually empowers our ability to care for others. We live in a cultural context that places a high value on the individual. We live in this kind of highly individualistic culture that raises up the hero caregiver. Think of the kind of archetype of the Lone Ranger, the many superheroes that are in the media, right? We kind of emphasize the singular figure. And this frame makes a lot of sense given our cultural history, given our modern lens, and yet it places the burden of healing, the responsibility of healing, right on the individual caregiver's shoulders. And that also makes the burdens that lie ahead seem insurmountable in many ways. This frame, this individual frame, also misses the deeper relational framework that many ancient wisdom and spiritual traditions have pointed to, in which our power to care is cultivated in relationship. It's not something we take on ourselves as a simple self-help technique. It's not something that we do on our own. It's certainly not something we do simply to reduce stress. It's a way of learning to care for others in the way that we've been cared for. And we can tap this relational dimension of care right now by simply calling to mind a moment of care in your own lives. A simple moment of connection in which even briefly you felt seen, at ease, basically welcome. This could be a moment from your childhood when you remember being with someone who you just liked being around, or a moment in school with a teacher or a mentor, someone who's just saw you or believed in you in some way, kind of saw potential in you. Or it could be a moment that happened recently or today, a moment of simple, genuine human connection, when someone really smiled at you but really saw you, even however briefly, or held the door for you, or let you pass in traffic, with an acknowledgement of you as a human being in some way. So as you think of that moment, you can connect with it by trying to call it to mind as vividly as possible, almost as if you're imagining that it's happening right now. And in doing so, you can start to re-experience that simple connection, that simple feeling of being seen at ease. And as we do this, and as we practice this over time, we can learn to cultivate that sense of being welcome, feeling here, feeling okay. And as we learn to call to mind moments of connection that have pervaded our lives, we might learn to notice many, many, many moments of care that have often gone unnoticed. Moments of care that have gone unnoticed because we're really not trained in a way to notice such moments of connection. In fact, we're often trained to learn to notice the opposite, moments of disconnection. But even if you're doubting right now, there have been thousands of moments of care that have pervaded our life. The simple fact is, none of us would be here if we weren't held in care throughout our lives. And still, some of us might have resistance. As I talked about that really simple practice, some of us might have struggled to come up with a moment of connection. Or something might have come to mind and we might have said, oh, no, that really wasn't a moment of care. I mean, it was kind of care, but they really wanted something from me. We don't really trust those moments of care. Yeah, sound familiar? Or we might be thinking, actually, I don't really deserve care. I don't want to be seen in any kind of way. My job is to give to others. I don't want to kind of let my guard down. We might have also noticed some resistance in the body in some way, too. And this makes perfect sense, right? If ever in our entire lives we've experienced loss or grief or feeling vulnerable or being excluded or worse, further difficulties with trauma and so on, it makes total sense that we would have some kind of resistance to being open to and receiving care. And it reminds me of the Daphnia flea. This is a little water flea who, when you place these fleas in an aquarium in which the scent of a predator has been released, they actually grow a helmet and a long spiny tail. Literally a protective layer to guard them, right? And when you take these Daphnia flea out of the water, they lose these helmets and the shells. Kind of reminds us of us, except it sometimes seems a little harder to shed these shells, right? So this is a direction of inquiry for me. How do we learn to soften our own shells? Seems like we're all Daphnia fleas in some way. Now, some of you might also be thinking, if you knew anything about my childhood, or if you ever met my mother, or if you ever dated my ex, you would know I have a little helmet around my heart, and I have no interest in letting it go, right? And I can relate, if only I could just show you the helmet on my heart. But something is also really interesting about the Daphnia flea. So not only do they develop shells, but female Daphnia flea who have offspring, when their offspring, encounter their first threat, they grow helmets and shells that are significantly larger than their peers. So it's almost as if we're passing down the priming of fear or trauma through generations. Now, of course, this means we need to deal with real traumas in our daily life, in the world, right? But what if we could learn ways of softening the blow just a little bit? What if we could learn ways of feeling just a bit more safe, a bit more at home here, a bit less threatened? The good news is we can. So there's been a lot of research on the effects of priming and caring figures. And some of my favorite researchers have looked at the ways in which if people are primed with images like this cute little kid, or images of caring figures, or for younger children, their ideas of superheroes, or if they're even primed with secure words like love or care, they can, even for a few moments, feel more secure, more at ease. And when we feel more secure and more at ease, we're more likely, willing, and able, actually, to reach out and extend care to others. So in a sense, our ability to feel at home is directly related to our ability to care for others. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could feel more safe here in this world, more at home in our own minds and bodies? Anybody? Yeah, I think we all think that. And we know, those of us in service, those of us who teach, those of us who see clients, we know that safe, caring relationships are necessary for our children or our clients' health and development, right? And even though we know this, and even though it seems intuitive, sometimes some of us struggle with befriending ourselves in that same way, providing that same kind of unconditional caring stance to ourselves. And a lot of this is cultural. Again, we've learned that taking time for ourselves, taking time for self-care makes us maybe weak, makes us selfish, is somehow self-indulgent in some way. And yet it's kind of the linchpin in our capacity to develop care. One of the biggest obstacles in feeling at home in our minds and bodies, it seems, is our ability or our challenge to relate to some of our own feelings. It seems that we've learned culturally that emotions, for the most part, are not rational. They're kind of the enemy of reason. They're to be avoided, suppressed, controlled, managed in any kind of way, yeah? And that to express anything other than happiness in this culture seems like a sign of failure, yeah? But imagine if your child or one of your clients came into your office and they were really struggling with something. They were really upset. And they came into your room and they just started crying. And you stopped and said, no, we don't do crying here. We don't do sadness here. You're gonna have to leave. You would never do that, right? But we do this to ourselves all the time. We constantly say there's something about me and my experience, something that I'm feeling, that is not okay, that is not welcome here. It's by learning actually to settle into, to be okay in our own minds and bodies, that we actually can learn to host and welcome others more deeply. We can really learn to be with others in more intimate ways if we can learn to be with ourselves more intimately. And finally, the fact is we really have the capacity to extend care to others. It's actually really natural for us to extend care to those that are close to us, those in our so-called in-group and those in our families. Although Ram Dass once famously said, if you think you're enlightened, try spending a week with your family. But this is the easy thing. So what we're trying to do is find a way to kind of beef this up. And yet, even though we have the capacity to care, we all know from our own experience that that capacity is limited. It's a little bit harder for us to care for the stranger, and it's definitely harder for us, I think, if we're being honest, to care for the person that we don't really like that much, or that treated us unkindly, right? And day by day, we go around in the world not really seeing people, or seeing people based on our ideas of them, whether we like them or we don't like them, or they're a stranger to us, they're in our in-group or not. And we also talk so casually as a culture about like that person, just that woman, that guy, that conservative, that techie, that Jew, that Muslim, that terrorist. And when we say those words, you hear that, right? It almost sounds for a second as if that's all that person is, as if we're relating to human beings just as ideas, as if we're not even sensing the full humanity of people there, as if we haven't really connected on some deeper level with their fuller potential and our fuller capacity to care. So this is a learning. We actually can learn to cultivate and deepen our capacity to really connect with others. And I think a lot of times about the children in foster care, and I think of the ways in which they're not seen. There are huge social implications for not seeing people. The way in which they're not really taken as seriously. Many of them were children of color, and I think about the ways in which maybe they're not seen in their potential or dismissed by their teachers or their employers. And we know the real-world effects that not seeing children in their potential has on their ability to perform and succeed. And similarly, I think of all those in other marginalized communities who so often aren't seen by others. And I wonder how we can learn to see more and more. We have many examples of people who, long before us, have been modeling for us how to see deeply the full capacity of others, who show us how to see the humanness in so many others, to fight for justice on behalf of others, not against them, to uphold the dignity of others even while confronting harmful actions. And I want to suggest that these aren't ideals that are too far out of the way. If you've ever shown up and been a friend for someone, if you've ever seen past a limiting idea or stereotype you've had of someone, you've already started to cut through. You've already started to tap the capacity right now to really connect and commune with other people. But to do this in the long haul and to really deepen this requires that we feel safe in the world. The more safe we feel, the more willing and able we are to encounter others' suffering. And that takes courage. But that courage naturally arises. It's a natural power or capacity of care that we realize when we realize that we've been held by many, many, many others before us who have modeled, who have shown us, and who have cared for us. And it's through learning repeatedly to be seen in that way, to be at home here, that we can learn to extend and host others in that way. So my hope is that we can learn to help others similarly feel at home, know that they are seen, and know that they are loved.